Welcome to Halting Toward Zion, a podcast where we limp like Jacob to the promised land and talk about life, the universe, and everything along the way. I'm Emily Maxon, here with Greg Uttinger and Rachel Wojtek, and we are in the middle of Passion Week. We are talking about the final week of Jesus' ministry. We've talked about the triumphal entry and some of the following events there. And we are about to have some questions from the Pharisees and Sadducees, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm. Well, what we need to do first is remember that this is the time when the Passover lambs are being examined to see if they are indeed without spot and blemish. At the same time that's happening, the Father has arranged for his Son to be questioned with some very penetrating questions. At least they would seem formidable to us, because the Jews had been asking these questions to one another for a long time and not always come up with any kind of good answer. So his enemies think, let's use our standard trick question that no one could ever answer, and that will prove he's not Messiah, he's certainly not God, he doesn't know everything. Watch this. Watch this. So the first group that approaches is the Sadducees. They come, now the Sadducees are the temple authorities. This is the high priest and his extended family. Being the high priest, they are in charge of the temple. And the question they ask is legitimate, which is why Jesus answers it, although their motives are far from pure. And they come and they simply say, by what authority doest thou these things, or who gave thee this authority? Jesus has cleansed the temple. He's taking command of the whole temple area, isn't allowing people to go through and buy and sell. The whole thing is being disrupted. And he's sitting there in the center of the temple teaching like he's a prophet or God or something. And so far, no one's had the guts to do anything about it. Well, the temple authorities really should. Even if this were Elijah or Isaiah or Moses, they should at least have the guts to step forward and say, excuse me, sir, why are you doing this, and why do you think you have a right to do it? Well, they finally do, but they're hoping that Jesus can't give an answer that will satisfy them, and that thus he will look foolish before the crowd. Now, Jesus' answer at first seems out of left field. Like, that's not an answer. In fact, a lot of people think, he's being sassy to them. Yeah, go Jesus. No, he's not. What he says is legitimate. He answered and said, I also will ask you one thing, which if you tell me, I will in likewise tell you by what authority I do these things. The baptism of John, whence was it, from heaven or of men? So we've got, I will not answer, cannot answer your question until we establish something first, and that's the baptism of John. He doesn't explain why. And they may or may not have understood it. But once Jesus said it, it was such a simple, obvious question. Remember, and Jesus is surrounded by crowds who've come to hear him teach. They can't just say, no, you first, or we ask you, they're stuck. They have to, it's a simple yes, no question. This is not a big deal. But they panic. And they withdraw a moment and reason among themselves. If we say John came from heaven, then he's going to ask, why didn't you believe him? And if we say of men, they look around, the people will stone us because they're convinced that John is a prophet. So they realize they have no comfortable answer, and they come up with the greatest pragmatic answer ever. We cannot tell. Great, you're the temple authorities and you cannot tell. Jesus does not rub it in. He does not make fun of them. He simply says, well, then neither do I tell you by what authority I do these things. Well, he just did. He's appealed. The point is, his authority publicly, officially, legally, was announced by John, both in terms of John's prophetic office, behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. One comes after me who's mightier than I, whose shoes I'm not worthy to bear. He'll baptize you with the Holy Ghost. But also in terms of, and here the question is, well, not every prophet stepped into the temple and made alterations. That was a rather rare thing. Usually they would speak to the priest and let the priest do it. But here Jesus is taking command of the temple. What gives you? You're acting like you were a priest. Well, do you remember John the Baptist? Yeah, he was a priest, the son of a priest. His birth was announced in the temple, miraculously, by an angel. And he baptized me. Now, we think in terms of New Testament baptism, and that's proper. That's part of what happened with Jesus, as he identified with his people. But there's something else going on there. Remember the story, no sooner has Jesus been baptized than the Holy Spirit descends upon him and anoints him to be our prophet, king, and priest. In other words, the baptism prepared him for his role as our great high priest. And in the Old Testament, we look back to when the tribe of Levi is set apart. There was a ritual cleansing, yes, a sprinkling, whereby the whole tribe was set apart. The priests needed to be cleansed before they began their office. And remember when Jesus came to John, John said, shouldn't you be baptizing me? And Jesus says, no, it becomes us to fulfill all righteousness, that is to keep the law. Well, Jesus joined with us in part to share everything we share, and his people will receive baptism, so he does. But there was no obvious law requiring it. There is a law that says that priests should be cleansed before they're anointed. That would seem to be what he's pointing at. You want to know why I'm doing this? Well, let's talk about John, supernaturally born child, birth revealed in the temple to a priest. He's the son of a priest. He cleansed me, and then I was anointed by the Father. I think that qualifies me as priest, don't you? That's all implied in I'm sorry, I can't answer your question, because he just did. And the Sadducees back off on this one and don't know what to do. And then Jesus launches into a couple parables that portray the doom of Israel, the apostate Israel as a nation, and God's taking his vineyard, his kingdom, his inheritance from them and giving it to a new people. And then along come the Pharisees and the Herodians. The Pharisees, we remember, are extreme nationalists, but they're polite about it. Basically, they're cowards. They don't like Rome. They think Rome has no right being there. They'll gladly see Rome kicked out, but they're not going to say that. The Zealots will say that. And the Zealots end up, being crucified and thrown into prison, things like that. So the Pharisees aren't going to go that far. But they don't like Rome, and they don't like Herod. Herod is Rome's puppet on the throne of Galilee. And then there are the Herodians. Well, the name speaks for itself. They are the support group to Herod, and they're trying to tell Israel, well, Herod's, kind of the Messiah. He's a king. He's the king of the Jews, and he's a great guy, and he's done great things, and he's kind of our shield against Rome, but he's also an agent for Rome, and so has lots of power, and if you will receive it, this is the Messiah that was for to come. And most people weren't buying that, but still, that was and the Pharisees and the Herodians absolutely hate each other's guts because they represent different political agendas. But somehow they managed to get together because neither of them likes Jesus. And they come all fawning and humble-like and say, and this is Matthew's version in chapter 22, Master, we know that thou art true and teachest the way of God in truth. Neither carest thou for any man, for thou regardest not the person of man. Yeah. Tell us, therefore, what thinkest thou? Not what has God said, because they don't consider him the authority. They just want his purely human opinion. And this is one that it's a trap. Here's the question. Is it lawful to give tribute to Caesar or no? Now, again, it's a simple yes or no question, but it comes with practical consequences. If Jesus says, no, it's not lawful, then he's a tax rebel. And whatever exegetical support he may have from the Mosaic Law doesn't matter really to anybody. In particular, it's not going to matter to Pilate, the Roman governor. All the Jews have to do is say, hey, we got this guy over here saying you don't pay your taxes, which in the end is what they did do when they couldn't come up with anything else. So you need to deal with him. And Pilate, without a blink, would say, "Oh, tax rebel, we know what to do with those," and throw him in prison and crucify him, and that's that. And it's not the way to the cross the Father has planned, and he would be dying as, in Rome's eyes, a convicted criminal, and that's not how this has to work. Rome has to declare him innocent. So that's the one side. The other side is he can say, "Well, yes, but the law said that you cannot set a foreign king over you." And so they could say, "So you're willing to admit, we thought you claimed to be Messiah, a king, something like that, and yet you're telling us we ought to pay tribute to this Gentile, this unbeliever, who takes his money and who knows what horrible things he did with it." And in fact, Rome did horrible things with the tax money and would do yet more horrible things before this is all over. Some of those taxes may have fed the lions that Christians would later be thrown to. They would support the lifestyle of adulterous, homosexual, violent, murderous emperors. So there's all kinds of good reasons for not paying these taxes. Doesn't that involve us in all the evil of the empire if we surrender? So there does not seem to be a good answer. And they figure, whatever he says, yes or no, we got him. The text says, "But Jesus perceived their wickedness and said, 'Why tempt ye me? Show me, you hypocrites, show me the tribute money.' They bring him a denarius, the Roman coin. It's a day's wages. It's the price of tribute, which, when you think about it, is actually light compared to what we pay these days. Anyway, so they produce tribute money from their own pocket. They have this coin. That's important. Jesus doesn't have one. He didn't have much of anything. Doesn't ask Judas, "Hey, do we got anything in the bag?" He simply turns to them and says to the Pharisees and the Herodians, "Can you show me a coin?" They come up with one. He says, "Whose is the image and superscription, the inscription on it?" They look at the coin, like, "Oh, Caesar's, of course." Yeah. So it's Caesar's money, minted by Caesar for Caesar, and yet somehow you have it. Isn't that strange? Wonder why you have it. Oh, that's right. He provided it for you so you would have a medium of exchange and a way to pay your taxes, to pay for all the services he renders, some of which you don't want, but some of he maintains the roads in relative peace, maintains the seas, keeps them free from pirates. You got something like a postal service, at least for official documents. You've got justice, which at least is evenly handed out, if not always correct. He does a lot of things for you, and you ended up with his money. It's his money. And it's important that the word is render. That means give back. You ended up with Caesar's money. He would like it back. Give it to him. And there's so much going on here that I won't even try to touch on it all. But at the very least, it does explain something about the nature of financial transactions. If I give you a loaf of bread and say, that'll be 25 cents, and you say, "Oh, I got that," and then hold on to it and say, "But I'm not giving it to you," you're a thief. No, I want the 25 cents. No, you're a wicked person. I'm not going to pay for it. You might go home and do all kinds of horrible things with that 25 cents. Not much you can do with 25 cents, but okay. But no, you may go spend it on some anti-life, homosexual, transgender cause. I can't risk that because I know you're not even a Christian, so I'm not giving you any money. You're stealing my money. Better you than me. That's theft. We recognize it in any other situation. And by the way, when we go to the store, whatever kind of store, whether it be, grocery store, McDonald's or Starbucks or something, and we spend money for a product, we don't know what those people are going to do with that money. And some of these organizations do contribute to very wicked causes or help fund very wicked candidates, as the case may be. And we could argue, well, I should just be free to take a Big Mac off the counter or leave with it because I'm not going to give them money because they're going to do evil things. No, that was theirs. Stealing. Yeah, it's called stealing. It's theirs. You cannot simply take it and walk off. You are a thief at that point.
Are we morally obligated to boycott such industries?
Well, apparently not. If we can buy, there was no, and you should boycott Caesar, though. No, you can't boycott. Boycotting the government is tax revolt, which is the very thing Jesus is not pushing for. And if you're not, and again, the Bible uses extreme examples to make a point. If we cannot refuse to give tax money, to pay our bills to a very wicked, remember, Caesar claims to be the son of God. Doesn't get much worse than that. And yet Jesus says, pay your bills to them. Then, and it doesn't say, but make a fuss about it. Just pay them because they gave you something. They're providing a service. The fact that you may not want them to be the ones who provide the service does not matter because you use the service. You walk those roads, you sail those seas, you put Roman stamps on your envelopes or whatever the equivalent was. So pay your bill. And the same thing for us. Do we have to boycott wicked industries? You can if you want, but there's nothing in Scripture that suggests you were morally obligated to.
In other words, you're not morally implicated in other people's spending of their money.
Thank you. That's exactly what I wanted to say, but I couldn't come up with words.
Okay. One of my previous pastor, Emily's pastor still, he calls it secondhand sin. You are not responsible for secondhand sin.
Yes, exactly.
Because you're not doing it.
Yes.
If you have done a legitimate transaction with another where you give something that you want to give away for this other item, and you have both agreed that this is what you want to do for this amount, that is where your moral responsibility ends.
Yeah.
And again, you can say, hey, I don't like that company and all their policies, and therefore I'm not going to buy stuff from them. But that doesn't change their policy in any way. Boycotting is something from the late 1800s, early 1900s, with a lot of Marxist influence on it, of the poor oppressed rising up against their oppressors.
Yeah.
So we should be very careful when we start using some of those historical means to try to get our point across. But
also, they're just very rarely effective.
Yeah.
No, I think the only one that has been effective is some of the stuff with Target when they went way over the top with some of their transgender stuff, and they lost so much revenue that they have backpedaled significantly to where they're compared to where they were. It's like, wow, you're actually going to do that or that. But the other thing I was thinking is there's a point where Jesus tells Peter to go pay the temple tax, which think of who was running the temple and how the temple was being run. He doesn't say, don't pay it because bad people could use it. Rather, let's fulfill that law. Let's fulfill that rule. So it's not about how the other person's going to use the money. Because you could say that about church too. Oh, I don't like how the church spends the money, so I'm not going to tithe.
And a lot of people to say that, actually.
Yeah. Well, I'll just give it all to my own personal what would you say?
Church ministry?
Causes. And because I know that I will use my money better than other people, which is, again, very prideful and self-righteous.
And whether it's church or state, in both cases, we're ignoring God's due order and thinking that simply because they're not living up to God's standards, we don't have to either. No, it's not the way it works. And for a lot of people, what we're saying here is going to be revolutionary. Wait, but I always thought, this is why we study the law of God in all of its fullness, and particularly look at how Jesus interprets it, because he is the infallible explainer of what God intended.
He's the one who fulfilled it in God's eyes, so his interpretation holds all the weight, actually. Nobody else's interpretation
No
matters.
one else counts. But there is one more thing, though. Render therefore unto Caesar the things that are Caesar. Caesar does have a legitimate claim on some things, like this tax money to pay for the services rendered. But there are things, by saying that, the implication is there are things that don't belong to Caesar.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus doesn't talk about what those things are specifically and whether or not there are other things that are on the same level. I mean, he could have said, and render to Starbucks the money you owe them for the coffee you drank. But that's not the point here. He's talking about the higher priorities we have in life, the more demanding, the ones that God has ordained. And so he ends with this, and unto God, render to God, that is, give back to God, the things that are God's. Now, a lot of people look at that and say, oh, So we have a division between what we owe to the state, our political debts, and what we owe to God, which is apparently a separate category. And we give some money to the state because we kind of have to, and we give other monies to God. That is not what he is saying. Because in the context, we have to ask, well, what is God's? Well, I am. All of my money, my life, my future, my sexuality, my pastimes, time itself, the state I live in, the country I live in, the civil government under which I serve. Caesar himself belongs to God. And so this is not a nice bifurcation, dichotomy, big words, a division. This is not a division between God's stuff and other stuff. This is, yes, Caesar has some legitimate claims because God has given him those legitimate claims, though he may abuse them and push them more than he should. But even Caesar himself, your political life belongs to God. So yield up your political life to God. So when God says this, you don't get to argue with God about whether or not you have to pay your taxes, because your tax money belongs to God. And he said, give it to Caesar. So do that and don't talk back.
It doesn't say give Caesar his money and God his money. That's not the noun.
That's not the noun. It is rather all that God owns. We are to turn back to him because we got it from him. Everything comes to us by pure gift through Christ. And we are to give it back to God in service. And in some cases, that does mean giving him money, paying our tithes, giving offerings and such. But on a more general term, it means yielding up our lives with all of our possessions. Think whole burnt offering and tribute offering as pictures of this. I belong wholly to God, and all my stuff does too. And so I lay at his feet, and then he tells me what to do with it. I seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. And part of that is observing the political niceties that he has told me to do and not arguing about it because I think I know better than God. Well, they heard these, they marveled. Like both sides, like, we never heard that before. So there's a third possibility? Whoa, we missed that. And they go their way. Well, Sadducees are back. The same day. And the Sadducees were reminded in the text, they were the liberals of the day. They received only the 5 books of Moses. They didn't trust the prophets. And they did not believe in the resurrection of the dead. They did not believe in the soul or spirits. They did not believe in angels. Amazing, they tried to believe in some sort of God, but it's apparently a kind of deistic God. So they want to, this is their hobby horse. We've used this before. No one's ever been able to answer it. We'll turn the law of God, the book of Moses, back on this idea of resurrection, score a point for ourselves and make Jesus look like a fool. So they come and they bring before Jesus the case of the levirate marriage. This is tied to the office of kinsman redeemer. Let me read what they say. Master, Moses said, if a man die, having no children, his brother shall marry his wife and raise up seed to his brother. This is one of the duties of the kinsman redeemer. The kinsman redeemer must be next of kin of the brethren who still live close together. And if one of their kinsmen dies, then the nearest kinsman is to step in, avenge him if that's an issue. If there are no children, marry the bride and raise up seed. The first child born of that union will bear the name of the first husband and receive his inheritance in Israel and all of his titles and rights and such. Kinsman redeemer, of course, also was supposed to redeem such a person. If such a person didn't die, but was simply sold to slavery or taken in battle, he was supposed to redeem him. And if he got into debt and lost his lands, he's supposed to buy back the land. So that's the kinsman redeemer, and they're focusing on the one part of marry the bride, raise up children. Simple enough. How complicated could this be? Well, now there were with us 7 brethren, nice complete number, and the first, when he had married a wife, deceased, and having no issue, left his wife to his brother. Likewise, the second also, when the third also, and the 7th. So one by one, there are 7 brothers. Each one is apparently obligated by the law to marry the woman, and faithfully does. And yet, in no cases, God bless the union with children, and each one dies. Yeah, this is when you don't want to marry this woman. Okay. Yeah. My first husband was run over by a train. My second husband was hit by an airplane. The third one fell off a cliff when an earthquake crack opened beneath his feet.
Common denominator.
Yeah.
If this were Agatha Christie, we would know what to think about this.
Yes, exactly. And they run through all 7, and there are no children. One of the other Gospels tells us, just to make it very clear, well, his wife deceased in heaven. Yeah, okay. And the other Gospels are clearer that there's no children. So if there had been a child, then you might say, well, the one that produced children, that's the real marriage. No, so no one has it. Probably they know of a historical situation where this really happened. Otherwise, you could say, oh, God would never let that happen. You're making it up. They probably had names and such that they could appeal to. Yes, this did happen. So here's the point. All 7 of these guys married this woman. But in your perspective, we take it, there will be a resurrection. And when they all come to life, verse 28, therefore, in the resurrection, whose wife shall she be of the 7? For they all had her. Ooh, that sounds so hard. Do we become Mormons?
Oh dear.
Well, looks like they all get, except it's backward. She gets 7 husbands through all eternity. They see the absurdity of that. And the Pharisees apparently had never been able to answer this one. The Pharisees did believe in the resurrection. This was a point of contention between them. But if the Pharisees had come up with an answer, this would not be a trick question. It already would have been answered. So nobody knew how to answer them. They just knew that there was something wrong here someplace, but I don't know what it is exactly. Jesus, again, without missing a beat, simply, his bluntness here is staggering. You do err. You're wrong. You don't get it. Not because why? Because you don't know the scriptures nor the power of God. Now, power of God, that's pretty straightforward and easy, that God can raise the dead and such. You don't know the scriptures. I don't know for how many years I looked at that and said, apparently I don't either, because I don't know what in the world you're talking about. I was well into my career as a school teacher and a Bible teacher before any light dawned. What in the world scripture suggests that there's no marriage in heaven? I mean, it makes sense, but where does the Bible say that? And why does Jesus condemn them so bluntly for not getting it? Eventually, I discovered a passage in Ecclesiastes that talks about marriage belonging to, the marriage of your youth, and then things, you die and things. And I was like, okay, that's close. That's not exactly it. And then eventually, approaching the topic from a whole different direction, not planning on approaching it at all. I was doing, as you know, stuff in Genesis where I usually am stuck. And Genesis 1, fill the earth. Fill the earth. There is a limit set on how many people God is going to allow to be born into the world. There's a finite goal represented by a time limit and a number limit, number of souls, a number of people that would constitute filling the earth. Now, we don't know what that is. God has not told us. And any trip down 99 in California or any flight over the Great Plains will tell you we aren't anywhere near there yet. The earth is far from being full, despite all the brouhaha a generation or so ago about overpopulation. The earth is severely underpopulated. But God pushes for a population explosion, but he wants it to be done by his people, and the fall kind of screwed that up temporarily. But as we look at the Gospels and the New Testament, that's still the promise. All nations blessed, all nations Jesus' disciples, the prophets, all earth full of the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the seas. So that hasn't changed. But anyway, the point being,
we also get the New Testament additional help of marriage is an image of Christ in the church. And as the reality comes to fullness and fulfillment, the image falls away.
Yes.
But they didn't have that in the Old Testament, so that's cheating.
They didn't. I mean, they had hints. I mean, Israel is Jehovah's wife, but yeah, you're right. That wasn't clear. So, but what that means then is, And the same thing was hinted in the Sabbath day, actually, the first Sabbath. God did his work and rested. So man should be able to do his work, that of subduing the earth and exercising dominion and filling it. And then there's an end, and then begins glory and eternal rest. Mm-hmm. So the original creation ordinances all pointed to time as we know it, this historical process of developing this world, as being finite and limited. There will be an end. And when that end comes, then the earth is full and God blows the whistle, calls time, and there will not be any more marriage because there's no need for any more children. As Lewis would say, the number of souls that Maleldiel read in his father's mind from the beginning of time will hit that number. Evangelical evangelists used to be a little more aware of this, I think, than they are these days, because some would approach their evangelistic endeavors very seriously with the idea that there will be a day when that last soul will believe in Jesus, and that will end history. What if someone I preach today is that last soul? What if the last convert here tonight is the one who calls time on the game and Jesus returns before we get to go home? That's kind of awesome. It's kind of scary. None of this left behind nonsense, just there's going to be an end. And when that end comes, then there's no more need for more people, so there's no more need for children, and thus there's no more need for marriage. Since one of the functions of marriage, one of the central functions, is to produce seed for the kingdom of God. So anyway, that's what's going on here. Now, Jesus says, he reveals stuff that we didn't really know from the Old Testament. He says, for in the resurrection, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but there is the angels of God in heaven. That is beyond human sexuality as we currently understand it. But then, rather than just leave it there, he says, "Okay, so you want proof from Scripture. Well, actually, you want proof from the Torah because you don't even believe the prophets. There are all kinds of places you can go in the prophets to prove the doctrine of the resurrection." He picks something wholly obscure. He goes back to the burning bush because that's, again, the law. Okay, I have a cat in my lap. You go back to the beginning of the law. To Moses, and in sort of to Genesis. At the burning bush, God said, "I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Now, in the original, in Exodus, the verb's not there. It's been supplied by the translator. The point is not the is, it's the of. I, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. He doesn't say, I was the God of Abraham. That would imply that Abraham doesn't exist anymore. He identifies himself as the God of Abraham and the God of Jacob, the God of Isaac, which means in Jewish thought, in biblical thought, they're still alive. So much to your idea there are no spirits. Here are three. And the whole Bible looks down on the idea that the soul is meant to be by itself. If they're alive as spirits, that's not satisfactory. They need to come back to life. And so the fact that they still exist and God still, and here's the thing, I'm the God of Abraham. Well, what is that? What do you mean of? It means a covenant relationship. God promised salvation. If you're dead, God hasn't kept his word yet. God hasn't fulfilled his commitments. God hasn't kept his promises. So you need to come back to life. And so simply God claiming them as his own means he will save them because God's faithful. And that means the resurrection of the dead. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living. For all live to him, one of the other gospels say. And so everyone is astonished. They've never heard this before. They've never thought about this. They've probably never thought about interpreting Scripture this way before. They were looking for just simple, straightforward things. And this requires a little bit of thinking, of meditation. Well, the Pharisees and Sadducees hear that he's put them both to shame, and they've gathered together and are commiserating or mocking each other, as the case may be. And one of them, a lawyer, raises a question. Master, what's the greatest commandment of the law? And Jesus answers, but interestingly enough, earlier, we're told in Luke's gospel, that Jesus had turned this on on one of his questioners. Well, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Well, you've read the commandments, Well, how do you read the law? And the man says, well, love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and your neighbor as yourself. So Jesus was not the first one to say it. He'd elicited that same response from someone else earlier, but he repeats it now with divine authority. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and all thy mind. This is the Shema. It's taken from Deuteronomy 6. It is the confession or creed and prayer that every Jew recited every day. So they knew this. They memorized this one. It's not one of the 10 commandments. They were trying to get Jesus to set one commandment over against another. This is the nature of legalism and Pharisaism. Which is the really best commandment? What's the most important commandment? Because I bet I kept it and I bet you didn't. Yeah, you kept those lesser commandments, but I kept the important one. All that kind of nonsense. So Jesus says, no, forget arguing over the 10. That's not the point. They are all ultimately reflections and derivations of the greatest and central command, which is to love God with your whole being, which you all know because you say it every day. This is the first and great commandment. The second is like unto it, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Now, when he means second, he doesn't mean this is a wholly different commandment and that loving God's the most important thing. And once you're done loving God, then you should really seriously think about loving your neighbor. This is the same commandment seen from a different angle. And throughout Paul's epistles, he will refer to this. And he doesn't quote the first version, love God with your whole heart and soul and mind. He keeps quoting the second, love your neighbor as yourself. If there's any other commandment, it's briefly comprehended in the saying, love your neighbor as yourself. Keep saying it. Why is that? Because it's the same commandment, because you cannot love God if you don't love your neighbor. To put it in concrete terms, using the 10 commandments, if I kill my neighbor and steal from him and cheat against him with his wife and lie about him and ruin his reputation, and offer his, child as a human sacrifice and won't let him off his work on the Sabbath day so he can worship and rest, then I don't love my neighbor and I don't love God. However, if I love God, can I love God and break my oaths and commitments, not give my servant a day off? Can I sacrifice my children or his on an altar? No, these things all hang together. Well, what makes the first and the second the second? The first is phrased in terms of our direct relationship with God, and the second in terms of our relationship with men, but it's the same commandment. The Heidelberg Catechism comes close to being guilty of this. I won't charge it with error, but when it's asked, we're asked, how are the commandments divided? I appreciate a passive sentence because it doesn't say divided by whom. Mm-hmm. God didn't divide them. We've divided them for convenience sake. And we look at the first 4 and say, well, that emphasizes our duty to God, and the last 6 emphasizes our duty to man. And then that's true to a point as far as it goes. Although the 3rd commandment requires us to keep our covenants and commitments, and the 4th commandment requires us to give laborers a day off. So, it's not as airtight as some people seem to think it is. But that's something we've imposed upon it.
Jesus does call them 2 commandments, but then he says, on these 2 commandments hang all the law and the prophets, meaning that they are the same in function.
Yeah. On these 2 commandments hang all the law and the prophets. All of God's moral and spiritual revelation hang on these 2. And there's no separating them. You can't go through the rest of the law of the prophets and pick out this and that. Well, wearing blue fringe, that's really important. No, not playing football on the Sabbath day. That's really important. I'll be saying yes, ma'am, and yes, sir. Well, all of those things have their place, but that's not the heart of the law. The law is to love God with your whole heart, soul, and mind, and so love your neighbor as yourself. And whatever else is involved has to be understood in terms of that, not as an autonomous, here is a rule that I may keep to earn brownie points with God and to be better than all you slobs. This is the point and the end and the goal of the law. One of the other Gospels has the lawyer say, well, you have answered well. Yes.
Why, thank you.
Thank you. He has indeed. Jesus now turns to them, and it's his turn. He asks them a question that should be easy, but it wasn't for them. He says, what think you of Christ? What do you think of Messiah? Whose son is he? Oh, they figure, this is easy. First-year catechumen would know this one. Messiah is the son of David. Yeah, son of David. Yeah, David. Yeah, we got that one. That's easy. Ask us a hard one. Yeah, no. Really? Then, if that's so, why does, in Psalm 110, why does David call the Messiah Lord? My Lord, Adonai, if he's his son. If the Messiah is simply a human descendant of David, the general reckoning of the day would be, the father's greater than the son, and the grandfather greater than his son and so on. So David should be the greater one, and his son is somewhere down the line. The grandfather does not, the great-grandfather does not come to the little baby boy and say, oh, my Lord, how may I serve you? That's not the way the world works. And yet that's essentially what David does. He says that this Messiah is his Lord, and the word is the same word that's used describing Israel's relationship with Yahweh. It's not Yahweh, it's Adonai, my Lord, the one who is my sovereign Lord and my God. How then is it that in the Spirit, Jesus calls him Lord, saying, the Lord said to my Lord, sit thou on my right hand till I make thine enemies thy footstool. If David calls him Lord, how is he then his son? Now, Jesus is not saying that he's not the son of David. He's just saying there's more to it than that, and you've missed the obvious, which you're awfully good at. That's this whole section. And no man was able to answer him a word, neither durst any man from that day forth ask him any more questions. But the testing's not done, because he's going to stand 6 trials. He will stand before Annas, who was the man that the Jews reckoned as the rightful high priest, rightful being somewhat open to quibbling. Caiaphas, his son, whom the Romans appointed as the current high priest, before the Sanhedrin, which was the assembled Synod of Israel. Then before Pilate, who's the Roman governor. Then before Herod, who is the Tetrarch of Galilee, and thus Jesus was officially one of his subjects, and then back before Pilate. 6 trials. And at each one, they try to find fault. They try to find some impurity. The Jewish trials just simply end up in rubber stamping one another and saying, well, he claimed to be the Son of God, so that settles it. We don't need any evidence, including all the false witnesses we bribed. Pilate tries to get out of it by passing it on to Herod. Herod is not interested and simply passes him back. By implication, he finds no fault, because, if Jesus claims to be a king, he's a rival to Herod. If Herod saw any reason to be afraid of this guy as a political rival, he would not have hesitated to kill him. So then it comes back to Pilate, who, as the representative of the Roman government, will declare, I find no fault in him. And when he sends him to the cross, he sends him with the superscription with the crime is simply, he's the king of the Jews. And Rome declares Jesus publicly to be innocent. Legal declaration. He's innocent. And by the way, he's also the king of Israel. We say so. Mm-hmm. And so the Passover lamb, having been thoroughly questioned, poked at, prodded, checked out, will go to the cross pure, without spot and blemish, and everybody will know it.
Let me know if I'm reading too much into this passage, but we have actually just covered 5 questions.
Yeah. Never noticed that.
Well, I remember because my notes erroneously said that we were going to talk about 3 questions today. And there were 5. The first.
There were.
Yeah. The first had to do with priestly authority.
Yep.
Which is not where I would have expected it to start, given that I thought we were covering 3 questions. I thought I would see a prophet, king, and priest.
Well,
motif.
one of them is Jesus, and the other one I'd forgotten about, but it was just right there.
Right, but there is a pattern, and there is a prophet, king, priest pattern. It's just backwards at first, and then it flips.
Yes.
And kind of leaves us waiting for the last priestly question.
Interesting. I will have to think about that. And then, of course, you said 5, so we should probably consider covenant
I looked for
formatting
covenant
as well.
points too, but I didn't quite see them.
Well, the second question would make sense. The question about Caesar's authority,
representation,
the recognition that there is delegated authority. As for the rest, nothing jumps to mind particularly, because you would expect the question about the greatest commandment to follow the third point. So I don't know. There's something we can think about and hypothesize and come back to someday.
Yeah, but that's for another time. It is time to wrap up with some recommendations. I'm going to recommend Brave Men by Ernie Pyle.
Ooh.
Ernie Pyle, if you are not familiar, was a war correspondent in World War II. He was present at the invasion of Sicily and also of Normandy and lots of other places. Brave Men is mostly a compilation of his talking to individuals preparing for those invasions and following those invasions. Some character sketches. It's really good. It's some people are like, this isn't a great book because it's really just a compilation of newspaper articles, because it's a compilation of newspaper articles. That's what it is.
Wow, they're perceptive then.
Yeah, so perceptive. And it does, to the modern ear, it can feel repetitive because people tend to be like other people, especially people in similar circumstances, which these men were. So it's worth a read if you are curious about the mind of a soldier.
And that reminds me of something I haven't recommended. In form, I have not recommended at all, but in one level I have. The war correspondent thing reminds me of G.A. Henty, who was also a war correspondent and foreign correspondent.
I had no idea.
Yeah. That's where he got most of his material. And he wrote a series of young men's adventure stories in the early 20th century. The language is a little outdated for most people, but children with a decent education in literature can read it to profit. They're clean. They reflect a Christian world and life view because that was where he's coming from. They're not explicitly Christian as far as I know.
Sometimes he had to shoehorn that in. Like when he's talking about ancient Egypt, he's like, and these false priests were secretly Christians. Like, I don't know about that one.
Yeah. There's that. Well, having recommended Henty, I then proceed immediately to recommend Heirloom Audio's audio production of a number of his books. My friend Bill Hyde is in charge of Heirloom Audio, and he's pushed for audio dramas on Drake and Lee and all kinds of people who you would know and who right now have gone right out of my head. But they're fun. There's just William Wallace is another. Fun. I'm not one for audio dramas as such, but people who have listened to them and told me, hey, this is great. We sit around as a family and listen to these things. They are largely at least as historically accurate as Henty was, and Henty was a pretty good historian. They feature as the voice of G.A. Henty, the actor Brian Blessed, whom you may know from
The Taming of the Shrew.
Taming of the Shrew, Much Ado About Nothing, and Henry V. He played in all of those. He's the big burly guy whose pastime was climbing Mount Everest and things like that. Last I heard, he was in training before the current rush of anyone can go to space. He was in training to be an astronaut in case such a thing ever opened up, and he was getting on in years already then. I don't know even if he's still alive, but fantastic actor. And his heart was very much in this project. And first, I wrote the homeschool curriculum for it, Ghost wrote. And the first time Bill sent me a sampling of what was going on, the file simply said "blessed." I thought, okay, it's so you consider this to be blessed of God, I guess. It was a long time before I figured out, no, that's the actor's name. Anyway, if you like such things, if you this is maybe more for older children and young teenagers, but again, whole families have enjoyed it, and you can go to Heirloom Audio's website and browse and find what era and character appeals to you, and you'll probably enjoy it.
Cool. Rachel?
All right. Mine is a recommendation from my husband, actually, because I have not read this book yet. But I mentioned it to other people recently, and they went, "Oh, you should recommend that." So it is called 2084, and it is, let me get its subtitle, which is The AI Revolution, How Artificial Intelligence Informs Our Future. And it's by John Lennox. He is a Christian and a mathematician, and he is looking at the progress AI has made in terms of what it does, and all the way in things that it could potentially do and the projections and such. But he also is looking behind some of that at the notions of things like transhumanism, which folks like Elon Musk are dabbling into, of how can we basically make ourselves live forever using machines. And so he addresses those things in terms of scripturally, what does it mean to be human, and to have a soul, and to make and create things as Christians. What does that really mean, and how can machines not do those things? What are the problems? How far should we basically let those things go? So overall, David really enjoyed the book and found it very helpful in thinking about the ongoing increasing quantity of things that AI seems to be able to do so well for us. As a teacher, that was a huge issue in the last few years, and still is, of students that say, "Why do I need to learn to write? The AI can write for me, and it can write better than I can." But
it can write better than you can right now because you have not yet learned to write.
Exactly.
And you never will if you continue to use ChatGPT to write your papers.
Yeah.
Exactly. And if, as an example, I've seen lots of things that they turn in that AI wrote, and the AI still is programmed by people, and it still has a bias and is not and should not be handling the scriptures for us.
Yes.
So the only caveat I put on the recommendation is that he goes a little wonky in terms of taking AI into the book of Revelation and doing some interesting, I don't even know if it's dispensationalism or what, but seeing somehow AI and the mark of the beast and some of those things getting all intermixed.
Nothing new there.
So with that, it still has a lot of great things, because I don't know how many people as Christians, how many authors as Christians have actually tried to address AI so far.
And how many even understand it. That's been a repeated complaint of my husband, David, who actually works in the field and says there are not enough Christians who actually understand this technology. They're all just scared of it. So it's nice to hear of a mathematician who can actually speak with some expertise.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you both for this conversation. It's been a delight, and I look forward to next time. Thank you also to David, our producer, and my lawfully wedded husband, aforementioned technologist. If you would like to get in touch with us for any reason, dear listener, you can send us an email at haltingtowardszion@gmail.com. And if you would like to receive the transcript of this podcast in your email inbox, you can subscribe to our Substack at Halting Towards Zion. I think you just look it up by the title. Big thank you to our financial supporters who keep the show rolling, pay for our editing software, and good things like that. If you would like to join their number, once again, dear listener, visit patreon.com/haltingtowardszion. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time.